to a people beset with memories of having been reduced to objects by slavers and colonial oppressors. I have done this by reframing and retelling the African gendered narrative in solidly African-centered and gendered terms. The end result is a body of scholarship, 6 monographs, and a slew of journal articles and book chapters that is unapologetically African-centered. I have not rested easy with simply writing back at received African canon. I have also, for the past 25 years, dedicated my career to honing my teaching of African history in the US college classroom. At Michigan State University, I have developed and taught several award-winning undergraduate level courses on Africa, courses in which I have disseminated African-centered knowledge about Africa to thousands of young and inquiring minds. In this context, I see myself as a missionary in reverse, one whose job it is to teach African worlds on their own terms, a person whose job it is to teach Africa in ways that Africans themselves conceptualize their histories and their worlds. And the end result of this pedagogical odyssey are histories that do not always neatly fit into Western defined models of historical writing, understanding, and interpretation. Take, for instance, the fact that Africans do not necessarily conceptualize their histories in exclusively linear and strictly chronological terms. The proof of this can be found when a researcher approaches a living African archive, an African elder, with the following clear-sighted questions. What year did a particular event occur? Or, how old are you? Now, these questions may seem simple and straightforward, and thus could be expected to elicit simple and straightforward answers. But no sooner does the elder respond that he or she does not know what year the incident happened, or worse still, shares with said researcher that he or she is about 150 years old, then said researcher realizes that he or she has not asked the right questions. The right questions, the African-informed questions, should not be, in what year did a particular event occur, or how old are you? They instead should be framed to discern what might have been happening historically around the time of the event or the elder's birth. Questions such as these would be sure to elicit more precise answers such as the following. The event occurred when daytime became nighttime. Read, during the coming of the locust. Or, I was born during the time of the great destroyer. Read, during the great influenza. Again, I ask, whose questions, whose archives, whose answers? For informed inquiry elicits informed answers and interpretations. I teach what I describe to my students as the history of another Africa, an Africa that they most likely will not find in the average run-of-the-mill textbook. But it is the Africa that I know intimately, that I breathe, that I love. It is the Africa of my mother, grandmother, and all of the African women who have, during my past 25 years of researching and writing African gendered worlds, entrusted me with their stories. It is an African history that continental Africans recognize and see themselves in. These are our histories, our stories, and our archives. Okay, so that's my preface. And now I would like to read a little bit from my first chapter, or rather my introduction. The section that I would like to read is a section where I talk about my methods, focus, and some definitions. One of the central features of African historiography has been the fact that Africans produced fewer documents that historians have traditionally considered to be evidence. Government reports, letters, diaries, travelogues, wills, and property records. This has meant that until recently, the voices and the worldview of Africans were completely excluded from major works of African history. A fact compounded and gendered world access to traditional sources that scholars typically use to document their work, African-centered gender historians have necessarily had to find new methods to explore the voices of people who have historically been denied a voice. This text is part of that intellectual odyssey, functioning as a corrective while utilizing, where available, African-derived sources, including language and linguistics, the meaning and significance of names, metaphors, symbolism, cosmology, chronicles, songs, folk tales, proverbs, oral traditions, and traditions of creation to record the worldview and experiences of African women who did not leave written evidence of their lives in their own voices. So let me sort of define some of my terminology. I use the terms female principle and female spiritual principle to speak to and give voice to the totality of leadership and authoritative roles occupied by female entities in Africa. These terms are inclusive and speak to the manifestations of all dimensions of femaleness in society, be they in the human seen world, which I call the female principle, or the spiritual unseen world, which I call the female spiritual principle. In the human world, the female principle is embodied in women's roles as overseers and females of privilege, including women leaders of their people or wives of male leaders. These women exercise great power, authority, and influence publicly, temporally, and in spiritual religious spheres. My focus on the female spiritual principle, that is, female spiritual monarchs like rain queens, female mediums, priestesses, goddesses, masked spirits, sangomas, female medicines and prophetesses, is informed by African cosmology, which recognizes the existence of two distinct but interconnected worlds, the human visible or physical world. Wisdom, could you please, uh, yes, thank you. So it's informed, where am I? By African cosmology, which recognizes the existence of two distinct but interconnected worlds, the human visible or physical world, and the more powerful and commanding spiritual invisible world. This understanding consequently allows me to underscore the power, influence, and authority of the African great God, a spiritual force that in most African cosmological reasoning inhabits a space that is neither male nor female, but is essentially a balance of male and female forces, male and female principles. So let me now, let's see, so 5:29. What I would like to do, if I have the time, is do a little bit of reading on the African worldview, a case for African centeredness and balance. And then hopefully if I have time, I can do one case study from the book. And I would love to talk about Lovadu Rain Queens if I have time. So let me talk about the African worldview, a case for African centeredness and balance. So there is an Igbo proverb that states that where one thing stands, something else will stand beside it. Igbo proverb. The African world, African people identified, it is the world of human beings and of natural forces and phenomena. Spiritual, the world that we cannot, like two halves of a coconut, African world. The visible and invisible world commune and interact with each other. The African world is cyclical. This is why most Africans believe in reincarnation, the never-ending cycle of life. A person is born, grows old, dies, and is reborn, and the cycle continues. The pouring of libation to the ancestors in Africa symbolizes the establishment of a connection between the physical human world, where libation is poured, and the spiritual non-human world of ancestors and spirits who inhabit the bowels of the earth. Ancestors, the reborn, also appear in the human world during periods of crises or celebration. They are able to influence the fortunes of the living. They appear as masked spirits who protect the society as community guards or police, as courts of arbitration, which provide binding spiritual justice in trials among human beings, or as entertainers enthralling viewers with the beauty of the masquerade dance during celebratory periods in the life of the community, such as festivals. Contemplate. They believe that there are spirits all around them. There are too many for one to even know. Therefore, they have mediums to help explain the universe. These mediums, diviners, priestesses, priests and spirit mediums are special human beings. They are born into the human world, but are endowed with spiritual abilities. At the zenith of the spiritual world is God. The African God is neither male nor female. God is a supernatural force that balances both male and female principles. There are as many African names for God as there are people, over 3,000. For instance, the Acholi of Uganda call God Jock. The Asante and Fanti of Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, Nyame. The Azande of Sudan, Mbori or Mboli, and the Lavadu of South Africa, who I hope I can do a case of, Marawi. God is too great to behold, thus he is assisted by a pantheon of more accessible lesser gods and goddesses. These lesser gods and goddesses are autonomous, yet interdependent. They are personifications of natural phenomena. Their jurisdictions are localized. Africans have gods and goddesses of land, lightning, thunder, streams, rivers, and so on. Some of these deities are neither totally male nor totally female, but embody the duality of male and female forces that African cosmology so commonly elevates. For instance, the rainbow snake, Ayiwedo, goddess of the fawn, people of Benin, is believed to possess this balance of male, the red part of the rainbow, and female, the blue part of the rainbow. So this balance of male and female principles. Oracles are forces that explain the past and predict the future. Like gods and goddesses, oracles could be either male or female. The word oracle derives the Latin orare, to speak. Oracles, through their priests and priestesses, speak their predictions and explanations. Priests, priestesses, diviners, and spirit mediums are human beings who have been endowed with spiritual abilities to decipher, interpret, and communicate the world of the spirits. In general, priests and priestesses are attached to a given deity and serve to articulate the pronouncements of that deity. African cosmology typically calls for a balancing of male and female principles in the relationships between mediums and spiritual forces. Thus, when there is a god, that god most likely is served by a priestess. And when there is a goddess, that goddess is most likely served by a priest, male and female balance, right? So for instance, among the Igbo of Nigeria, the goddess Ani is served by the priest Ezani. The Egyptian goddess of fertility, nature, and animals, Sherek, is served by a priest. It is this same balance that is also witnessed in African constructions of great God as both male and female. Diviners, unlike priests and priestesses, are not attached to particular deities. They are special human beings who work for society at large, casting beads or cowrie shells, practicing invocation, using baskets, evoking trances, using animals, and consulting astrological and numerological texts to form, understand, and explain the present and predict events in the future. They are inspired by a god or goddess to foresee, to gain insight into a question. Spirit mediums are human beings who mediate communication between spirits of the dead and human beings. They do this through actual possession in a trance or spirit channeling. The spirit of the deceased speaks through these mediums, relaying important information and messages of support. Taken collectively, these special individuals that inhabit the in-between worlds are human voices of the unseen world, a world that they explain to human beings. The physical, visible world is the world of human beings, of men, women, and children. This world, the spiritual world, is hierarchical, and depending on the type of society, whether it be a centralized or egalitarian society, is led either by kings and queens or male and female elders in a dual sex or complementary fashion. Women in Africa have the authority and the influence because of their own achievements, not those of their husbands. Thus, a queen or queen mother is powerful in her own right as a ruler, and not because she is married to a king or is his birth mother. In fact, queen mothers in the African system are not necessarily mothers of a sitting king. Next in rank to these leaders of their societies are the titled men and women. Like queens, queen mothers, and female elders, titled women are recognized for their own achievements and not those of their husbands. All African women societies have male and female warriors whose job it is to protect their society from their enemies. The Amazons of Dahumi, an all-female regiment of warriors who operated in the 16th through the 19th centuries, were particularly powerful and led their kingdom from victory to victory. In Africa, all able-bodied individuals, regardless of gender, are expected to contribute to society by working outside their homes. African women have always worked and could be seen even today carrying their babies on their backs while going back and forth between the farm and marketplace. Indigenous slavery, and I put slavery in quotes because the institution of slavery in the African context is very different from chattel type slavery. So indigenous slavery can be both empowering and disempowering for the enslaved. Slavery in Africa is not a permanent condition. Enslaved persons work for their masters for a given period of time, after which they are able to manumit themselves and either stay in the community of their masters or find their way back to their natal communities. African slaves who are attached to the spiritual world as either wives, daughters, or sons of deities find their station in society elevated because of their relationship to said deity. In many ways, this relationship serves to empower them in relation to mere mortals. At the very bottom of the physical world's hierarchy are useless people. These are able-bodied men and women who refuse to work. They are deemed useless because they are not contributing to society in meaningful ways. So I am looking at the time and it's 5:40. John, do you think, do I have enough time to just do like one case study, or should we Should I stop and open up to conversation?
Well, we do have, we've got about close to 30, 40 minutes. So I mean, that's great with me. I hope that's okay with everyone else.
Could I just do one little, I'm not going to do both. Let me just do the Lovadu, just to give you a case study of some of this stuff.
Okay.
Thank
you.
Thank you. Okay. So, Wisdom, could you please forward the, thank you. Okay, so let me look for it. It's on page 55. Okay. Okay, there we go. Okay. So this particular case study that I'm going to be reading is about Lovadu rain queens. And the reason why I selected it is that unlike African societies, what normally obtains in African societies, where you have this dual sex system in operation, where you have men taking care of what is important to men and women taking care of what is important to women, this particular society, we don't actually have a dual sex system in operation. So it's unusual in that sense. You only have women in charge. And, you know, I will talk you through how the society organizes. And another reason why I chose this particular case study is that these rain queens, even though they are born human, they are endowed with spiritual idiosyncrasies. So they are believed to be more than human beings, right? They are elevated human beings, okay? And this case study is taken from South Africa. The present day country of South Africa is where I am taking this case study from. Okay, in the Lovadu kingdom, the Mojaji reigned supreme. Unlike elsewhere in Africa, where there is a dual sex or complementary system in which male rulers take care of what is important to their male subjects and female rulers take care of what is important to their female subjects, the Lovadu have exclusively female leadership structures. But this was not always so. Oral tradition suggests that the first rulers of the Lovadu were male. And the first of these male rulers was one Makafimo, who ruled the Lovadu until around 1800. Makafimo was succeeded by his son, Muhele. The Lovadu also had other male rulers, including Beduli, Kilahi, and Mugede. The last known male the last known male leader was Mugede. During Mugede's reign, his rain-making abilities was in decline. And in order to rejuvenate these powers, Mugede committed incest with his daughter. This abominable act ushered in a shift in leadership from men to women. In fact, Mugede's daughter would become the first Mojaji of the Lovadu. By European observers and surrounding Africans as she who must be obeyed, the Mojaji was renowned, respected, and feared throughout Southern Africa. Lovadu kinship, politics, the economy, and religion were united in the person of the Rain Queen. The Mojaji was the living embodiment of the rain goddess, and as such, she was inaccessible and mysterious. No one could claim to have seen the Rain Queen. This inaccessibility compounded by the fact that the Rain Queen was immortal and thus could neither be killed nor she had. in to take her selfless and powerful act, but not before she chose a successor. Although the Rain Queen guaranteed the yearly seasonal cycle and fertility of crops, her emotions were believed to influence rain. If she was dissatisfied, angry, or sad, she would not work well, and the rain would not come. In 1934 or 35, during the reign of Mojaji III, the first rains did not come until December. The consequential drought was attributed to her being upset about her daughter's liaison with a commoner. There have been 6 rain queens in recent times. Masalequene Mojan, who ruled from 1800 to 18, Masalambo Mojaji II, who ruled from 1854 to 1895, Kesotano Mojaji III, who ruled from 1896 to 1959, Makoma Mojaji IV, who ruled from 1959 to 1980, Mokope Mojaji V, who ruled from 1981 to 2001, and the picture that I have up there, Makobo Constant Mojaji VI, who ruled from 2003 to 2005. Masalequene Mojaji I was feared for her power and fame, famed for her diplomacy and influence. When she assumed office, she turned the chaos of her male predecessor's reign into peace and prosperity. She was, however, surrounded by restrictions that drove her into seclusion. For diplomacy by pacifying intruders in the Lovadu kingdom with beer and girls. She won fame and influence, which drew foreign ambassadors to her court. Some came with cattle, others with their daughters or sisters, gifts with which they would show homage or supplicate for rain. Some rain queens from faraway lands came to be. Even the Zulu king, Shaka, supplicated the Lovadu rain queen as she the rain queen what ordinary Lovadu women did for theirs, including hoeing her fields, brewing her beer, cooking her food, keeping her trading for her. Public, further elevating her mystique and influence in society. Her mother, she too committed ritual suicide after having designated the daughter on April of her grandmother. She was mother had been designated successor, but died 2 days before her On the day of her coronation, there was a slight drizzle, which was interpreted as a good omen. Makobu Constant, although respected for her power, abilities, and lineage, was seen as too modern to be a rain queen. custom, for instance, dictated that rain queens live reclusive lives, hidden in the royal carol with their wives. Makobo, however, wore jeans and t-shirts, visited dance clubs, watched soap operas, and chatted on her cell phone. She also had a boyfriend, David Mogale, a former municipal manager of the Greater Achebe municipality. He was rumored to have moved into the royal compound, causing great controversy with the royal council because the Rain Queen was only supposed to have sex with nobles the royal council chose. Thus, her lover was banned from the village, and the Rain Queen's 2 children were never recognized by the council. On June 10th, 2005, Makobo was admitted to Polokwane Medi Clinic. She died 2 days later at the age of 27. The official cause of death was chronic meningitis. For many years after Makobo died, no Rain Queen was named. Moreover, speculation was rife that because the Rain Queen's daughter was fathered by a commoner, the Lovedo were not likely to accept her as the rightful heiress to the Rain Queen crown. Therefore, there were worries that the 400-year powerful Rain Queen dynasty may have come to an end. These worries, however, abated in 2016 when 11-year-old Masalalambo, daughter of Makobo, was recognized as Mojaji VII by President Jacob Zulu, following the recommendations of South Africa's Commission on Traditional Leadership, Disputes and Claims, also known as the Tolu Commission. So let me stop there. Hopefully we have enough time to engage in conversation and discussion. Thank you so very much. Yeah, this was going to be my second case study, but we don't have time for it. So I want to make sure I leave enough time for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Achebe. That was amazing. Now I'm going to open the floor up to everyone. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat or raise your hand and I can call on people in that order too. Yeah, so if you have any questions, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Hi, Darcy. Just noticing you.
We'll start with John.
Thanks, Nwando. That was wonderful. I've got a question related to some work that some of my students are doing, including Erica, who I think, yes, I see on my screen, looking at the way in which history is taught in US high schools, and particularly the way in which it frequently omits the experiences of minorities within America. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about the extent to which the education about, say, Nigerian history that you would have received, or that is taught in Nigeria today, how much does it reflect a non-indigenous way of telling that history?
Thank you so much. That's a wonderful question, and a question that is, dear to my heart. In essentially all of Africa, and let me talk about West Africa because I was recently involved in the writing of a new textbook for West African secondary schools, and I didn't really have the time to do it. I was so busy, but I made time because it's essential. It's so essential and so important. our history, the teaching of history, not only in grade schools, secondary schools, universities on the African continent, is extremely colonized, right? They're still using course syllabi that were designed and constructed by colonial governments, right? And so one of the reasons that I was moved to participate in this writing of this text that we have, and that is available free of charge to all students in West Africa, was because of this, right? So the syllabi is extremely colonized in its leanings, right? It's very Eurocentric in its interpretations. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was to help introduce a new way of looking at African history, right? Of telling African history, of narrating African history, and to reach youngsters, you know, by so doing this. And so this group of historians, I was the only one in the US. I had two members of our team from universities in the UK, and then the rest of the members were professors and high school teachers in Africa. We all got together and dared to imagine, how can we do this and do this right? We were, however, bound by the syllabi, because if we don't write in relation to that syllabus, I'm not going to read it. You know, the syllabus is governed by the people that set exams into college and, you know, from junior secondary school to senior secondary school. So we are at a point where we are actually starting to have conversations with the people that set the exams to see how best can we move, you know, this new syllabus forward. And so, John, in answer to your question, extremely Eurocentric in its leanings, without, you know, African-centered ways of seeing or interpreting the worlds, you know, African worlds. You will be hard pressed to find that. It's written from a very Eurocentric interpretation of African history.
Good question. I have a question in the chat, and then we'll get to Marna after. Marianne asks, when Makobu VI died of meningitis, how was that explained when traditionally the rain queens did not die of natural causes? Did that affect the belief in the system?
That's a good question. Thanks for asking that. Again, I presented. It's interesting because I sort of debated in my mind how to present her story, given the fact that, you know, as far as the people themselves are concerned, they don't believe that rain queens can die of natural causes. But because Makobo was a modern woman, right, and she actually died in a hospital, which was so unlike, there was no other rain queen that had died in a hospital. So we had evidence of exactly what it was that killed her. And so as the Africanist historian who is, you know, on the one hand, I'm trying to sort of champion the history and the telling of history in African terms and respecting that, right? But on the other hand, I have this evidence that says that this is what killed her. Right. And so for me, it was important for me to present the evidence that I did have. Now, if you sort of look at it from an indigenous or Lavadu point of view, I am certain that they would argue that she died the kind of death that she died because she didn't abide by the rules and the restrictions and the regulations of what it means to be a rain queen. She wasn't a good rain queen in their conceptualization. She did a lot of things that rain queens shouldn't do. leaving the compound, the royal compound, going to parties, having sex with commoners. Who does that? So she did all of this stuff that they didn't like, they were not having. So in their mind, she wasn't actually a good reign queen. And so I believe that the way that they'll interpret that is, of course she died of this terrible death, because she didn't really sort of embody what she should have to be a good reign queen. And that's why the people decided that because she had had those kids, unapproved kids, right, that they weren't going to naturally inherit the office of reign queen. And it really sort of took the doing of the president of South Africa to say, you know what, we can't let this kingdom just go away, because that was the fear. For the longest time, a reign queen was not named, and therefore they just stood. There was no one person that was in charge of the Lavadu kingdom. And it took the president, the elected president of South Africa, working with this council that they had put together to preserve indigenous rule, and talking with the people, really sort of get to a point where they too were willing to accept Makobo's daughter as the heir apparent. So, in living memory, there's going to be the second reign queen who is going to be educated. And so it will be wonderful for those of us who are historians to sort of watch how it is. How is she going to modernize Lavadu reign, the Lavadu reign queen institution? What are they going to allow her to do, and all of that kind of stuff? It's a fascinating point in their history that they're at right now.
Really good question. Marna wanted to ask a question, so I'll turn the floor to her, and then Britain raised their hand next, and then I'll get to Judy as well. You're on mute.
This has been a fascinating discussion, and I learned a lot. I'm always interested in how historical perspective lends itself to contemporaneous times. And I am curious as to whether the power of both men and women in historical African society lends itself to the matriarchal nature of African American families today.
Yeah, that is an amazing question. And thanks for asking that. I think in simple, if I were to answer very quickly in simple terms, I would say yes. And the reason that I would say yes, I am somebody who likes to not only study African realities in Africa, but Africans in the African diaspora. So for me, my definition of when I talk about African women, frankly speaking, I'm talking about any woman that can trace her ancestors to Africa, to me, would be conceptualized as an African woman. And so, when you sort of think about it in that term, and look at pre-colonial African societies where what I call the female principle was so powerful, whether it be in the spiritual realm, right? When you look at the most powerful entity is God. God created everything. God is both male and female. So balancing of male and female principles. But beyond God, the most powerful deities in African cosmology are female. The deity of the lands is female. The deity of water is female. I don't know of any African societies where the deities of land and water are not female. And you need land and water to survive. Without that, you can't survive. So in fact, in most African societies, in my work, I argue, I work mainly on Igbo societies in Nigeria, that actually the most powerful deity, even more powerful than God, is the goddess of the lands, because without her, we can't survive, right? So you see that female principle and the power in the spiritual world, but you also see it in the human. And so let me just use one example to make this connection between the African world and the African American world. So this whole institution of female husband, that whole idea of a female husband, what does that mean? Or female father, right? So in African society, sex and gender do not coincide. So that we can be born biologically female, but we can become gendered males. A man can be born biologically male, but become a gendered female. And so a female husband is a woman who's born biologically female, but is a gendered male. And she becomes a husband because she wants to have children that bear her own name. She wants to be head of household. And so what does she do? She marries a woman and becomes female husband to that woman. And so let me just sort of give you an example. Let's just say I decide I'm married to a man, and you can be married to a man and married to a woman at the same time in African societies. And female husbandship, or it's called woman to woman marriage, is an elevated form of marriage that really sort of elevates a woman's standing in society. So I'm married to a man, but let's just say I want to elevate my standing in society, and I decide I want to marry you, Marna. So what am I going to do? I'm going to either pay bride price, bride wealth, or bride service. And it is a token amount that is given to the wife's family to allow the future kids born of that union to belong to the husband and bear his name. So in a regular man to woman marriage, a man pays bride price, bride wealth, bride service. In my case, my husband, my bride price was the equivalent of 10 cents. So, I just need to give you, because a lot of times people think about, oh, this is the selling of women. No, it is a token amount that allows the man rights over his future children. If that's not paid, those children will belong to the woman, so will belong to me and bear my name. So I'm married to a man, I have a child. If he didn't pay bride price, if he didn't do the 10 cents, my child will bear the Achebe last name. Okay. Now, if I marry you and I pay bride price and you have children, those children will bear my name. So it's this whole idea of this matriarch, right, that has its bearings in traditional African society. And in traditional African society, there was no such thing as an illegitimate child. No such thing. That whole idea of illegitimacy came as a result of the colonial enterprise of Christianity coming in. It was the missionaries that talked about illegitimacy. In Africa, please, once you are wanted, and you have a family. Your lineage is either your mother's or your father's. If your father paid bride price, you belong to your father. If he didn't, you belong to your mother, and you are cherished, right? And so it is that same idea. Also in pre-colonial African society, we didn't have the title of Mrs. And again, I'm trying to link this to the matriarch in African American societies or African Caribbean societies, right? There was no title of Mrs. It is Christianity that brought the title of Mrs. And so when I say to my students that I go by my maiden name, yes, I'm a feminist, but it's an African feminism. It's not about Western feminism. In Africa, before the colonial period, women never answered their husbands' names. Yes, we got married, but we were long-term visitors in our husbands' communities. And when we died, we went back home to our natal villages. So we were always visitors. So the bride price allows the children to belong to the husband's community and lineage. So yes, I give these examples just to show that I believe that there is continuity in experiences, from Africa to the New World. Yeah.
Thank you.
Really good question. Britton, you're next, and then I'll answer the question in the chat.
Hi, yeah. So I was thinking that these pre-colonial like the power of female monarchs and merchant queens is like really interesting. And I was wondering, with the influence of like Islam, Christianity, and Asiatic and European immigrants that really reshaped the continent, has that I assume it like diluted and diminished the authority and power of the female monarchs and merchant queens, but has there, like, especially during the colonial era, but has there been a sort of rebirth and rejuvenation of it in modern African society, and they're starting to get more recognition and their power starting to be restored in recent times?
I mean, your analysis is right on. That's really the argument in the book, right? Is that that's why I set up in the pre-colonial era, this is what was going on, right? You have this dual sex system. Women were not subordinate to men. That is a misnomer in Africa. There weren't any societies. It was just different. It was a complementary society, a dual sex society, right? What happens during the colonial period? The Europeans come in and bring in these Victorian type ideology that removes women from areas of power that they were so used to filling in the pre-colonial era, whether it's in politics. And that's why I start with, if you notice, it was really important for me to talk about the African worldview and start with the fact that all African women work. There's no such thing as a stay-at-home mom. And listen, I'm a mom, it's the hardest job in the world. However, African women always combined motherhood and paid work outside the home. And it's really because they did this, carrying their children on their backs, that when the Europeans came in, European women, they're looking at African women and they're like, what in the world? That's where the terminology and the ways in which they looked at African women, they talked about African women as beast of burden and all of that kind of stuff. But it was a total misunderstanding, because for the European women during the Victorian era, their whole thing was, I will sit and I will drink tea, right? I'm sitting at home and I'm pretty and I'm taking care of the household. To them, an African woman carrying her child on her back and going to the farm is overworked. An African woman looking at that European woman, guess what she's saying? You're lazy. So it's just sort of like, it's a different, totally different worldview. And so what the Europeans did, you're right, Britton, they pushed women out of areas of power, whether it's politically. There weren't any. One reason why my second book, I think, won the awards that it did, is that it turned canon upside down. Before I discovered this female king, canon dictated that there were no female warrant chiefs in all of British Africa. The British didn't deal with women. They pushed women to the back and put men in leaders of in positions of power. They also did it in the economic realm and the religious realm. Economic realm, women, 70% of African women are farmers. They pushed African women aside and gave the jobs to men, right? In religion, you have a God that's neither male or female. You bring in your Christian male God. If you're talking about Catholicism, you not only have the male God, you have male priest, not female priest. Oh yes, you have nuns, but nuns have to, give up marriage and procreation. So in many ways, it disadvantaged women. And so that's what you're seeing during the colonial period. And you are right, post-colonially, what's happening? The very last chapter of my book goes into it. I talk about African women today. And you are so right in your analysis that African women haven't gotten back to the power that they had in the pre-colonial era. But they are slowly and surely trying to get back to a semblance of their former powerful selves. So in politics, for instance, and I learned so much in terms of, African history when I was doing the research for this book. You know, initially I thought, oh, we've only had what, 2-3 African female presidents. Heck no, we've had so many female presidents. You know, the rest of them weren't, they were interim, right? So we've had acting presidents, interim presidents. The one president served for, I think it was like 24 hours, was the least time an African woman president served. But there've been a number of African presidents, African female presidents, right? In places like Rwanda, you have in the parliament, you have 60% of people in the parliament are women. So Rwanda is number one in terms of women representation in politics in the world. So in Africa, because Africa is so huge, you have these really good examples of women doing well and reclaiming their former selves, but in other African countries, not doing so well. And so what I did in my last chapter was look at the top 100 countries, and you will be surprised to find that the US is like number 100. And I think there were 50 something African countries that were doing so much better in politics, political representation than the US. We still don't have a female president right now. So right now we have a sitting African female president, right? And we've had, what, 4 presidents, 4 permanent presidents that were actually elected, and a slew of acting presidents and what is it called? Interim presidents. So yeah, so all of these forces, whether it be Christianity or Islam, Islam is a big one because Islam came so much earlier than Christianity. Christianity is coming into the Western Sudan in the 7th century. Sorry, not Christianity, what am I saying? Islam is coming into the Western Sudan in the 7th century and in the Swahili coast in the 15th century. Whereas for the most part, Christianity is coming in during the colonial period. So you're talking about the 1800s, except of course, places like Ethiopia where you have Coptic Christianity and little pockets of Egypt where you have Coptic Christianity. So those, we've had Christianity there from time immemorial. And so a lot of people don't realize when they talk about, oh, African women, this and that, they don't realize that it's actually what Islam is doing as opposed to what African culture is doing in terms of rights, women's rights. Yeah.
Really great question. There's one in the chat from Judy. This is referencing the Reign Queen's daughter after she died, yeah, and the president-elect. She said, since it was preserved, like the queendom was preserved by an elect president, was the new heir really accepted by the indigenous people?
Yeah, that's a good question. So she is actually heir in waiting. Yeah. So again, because again, remember, Lovadu Reign Queens are more than human. They're they would sit in that in-between world. So you're born human, but you've been endowed with spiritual idiosyncrasies. So she is an heir, she's a Reign Queen in waiting. She's now, because she's a teenager, she's in school right now. When when she hears, because she has to receive the calling traditionally, and she's going to go through an initiation ceremony. The initiation ceremony opens her eyes to start seeing, there are proverbs that say that Reign Queens, diviners, priestesses, prophetesses, that they have 4 eyes, whereas human beings have 2. So we are human, we have these 2 eyes that God has given us, but that these special human beings are endowed with 2 additional eyes that allow them to see that which mere mortals cannot see. So she has not gone through the initiation, rites, rituals that will allow her to open up her eyes and to start seeing those things that we cannot see. So the answer to that question is that we don't know, because she's still Reign Queen in waiting. So it would be a fabulous kingdom to sort of follow to see, what happens.
That sounds super interesting.
But again, she was, the president just didn't name her. It was in, what is it called? Uh, what's the term when you, consultation with the Loverdew. So it wasn't just sort of, you know, plucking her up and saying. It took years of negotiation back and forth, and who knows? I mean, if the president is involved, there's probably some monetary and some other things that are going to the kingdom to sort of ease the way for this to I don't know. You know, the stuff that's out there that we know is that they negotiated and they've agreed that they will, you know, allow the daughter of the pastoring queen to assume the mantle and the throne.
Are there any more questions? We might have time for 2 if we have to. DG, you're on mute.
Mute.
Hi.
Hi, Darcy.
Wonderful. Do you find a difference between the young people growing up in the villages and in the city in terms of understanding and having a closer connection to the spiritual aspects?
Yeah. You know, thanks for that question, Darcy. The beauty, I like to say to my students, of Africa is, here's a continent, right, that has this urban-rural divide, right? So a lot of the images that we see about Africa in the US are really about rural Africa. A lot of those images, like I spent the first 2 weeks in my African history classes just going through perception, point of view, mindset. Why is it that when we think about Africa, we think a certain way? We think all of that because of the images that we are being inundated about Africa, on Africa, you know, in the US. And those of us, and you know, you can bear witness to this, who have been and lived in Africa, know that the African reality is very different. There's that rural reality, which you see, but there's a very urban reality, which is like any city in the, like I like to say to my students, you talk about Beverly Hills in Lekki, Nigeria. Our Lekki, Nigeria is more beautiful than Beverly Hills. And you have people who are richer than, you know, and so it's like gated community upon gated community upon, so you have that, right? So it's this divide. And typically, the divide also goes along religious lines. So a lot of the people in the townships, in the urban areas, are Christians or Muslims, right? And the people in the rural areas tend to practice traditional religion more so than the people in the towns. But I have to trouble that a little bit and complicate that a little bit, because it is my argument. If you look at the CIA numbers, they'll tell you that the numbers of indigenous Africans that practice indigenous religion is very small. I don't agree with those numbers. And the reason I don't is that Africans do not, it's not either Christianity or traditional religion. It's not either Islam or traditional religion. The average African practices a syncretism of religions. So yes, you're a Christian, but guess what? In doing work for my first book, I visited over 300 shrines that had goddesses and male priestesses. And every time I went to a shrine, there was someone who attends a Christian church that was there begging the goddess to forgive. They're like, well, I've been going to Christian church because people are putting pressure on me. But since I've been going to the Christian church, bad things have been happening. So I'm here now to appease you, mother so-and-so, and beg that you help me and my family. So it's this syncretism, and there's no tension. People don't see this as a tension. If you were to say to that person, you're not being a good Christian, they'll be like, get out of town. Of course I am. I'm going to go to church on Sunday, but guess what? On Tuesday, I'm going to be at the shrine. So it's a combination. And again, the way that Africans have made Christianity more palatable is also to introduce indigenous elements into the Christian church. Africans didn't like those hymnals. My great uncle, who was a traditional leader, invited the missionaries into his compound. He was really rich. They tried to convert him. This is my great uncle. He tried to convert them. They didn't succeed. After a month, he sent them packing. Why? Not because he couldn't feed them, but he said that they were singing these sad and dreary songs that were upsetting his household. And so he said, you've got to go. I don't like your songs. And most Africans didn't like these hymnals. So when you go to African churches now, what are we doing? They're introducing drumming and dancing and African. So when they go to, to give offertory, people don't just it's not just sort of like da 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 da. People are dancing to the altar, right, with the drums and everything. And so they are Africanizing. And we actually had what we call Ethiopianism, or the African church, the African independent church movement, which is this combination of both. So yes, I mean, in answer to your question, I think spirituality is everywhere. It's even in the most educated, right? Before a gathering, what do? We break kola nut. And in the breaking of the kola nut, what are you doing? You're inviting your ancestors to be there. You pour libation. You're inviting your ancestors to be there. But guess what they do? The Christians now pour libation in the name of Jesus Christ, which is a cross. But so it's this mixture of religions now is what you get in Africa. Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Really good questions, everyone. We're now at 6:30 your time, 5:30 my time. So I just wanted to give another huge thank you to Dr. Nwando Achebe. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I know I learned so much, and we're really glad you were able to do this for us. I do have this recorded. I'm not sure as to where this is going to go right now, but I do have this recorded, everyone. So once we figure out a place where this will be, I'll definitely let everyone know. But I hope to see you guys. Dr. Waller, is one happening next week as well?
It is, yeah. Yeah, just a couple of quick things. Nwando, thanks so much. I think it's great fun that you chose Town Gown as the venue for your first public reading of your new book. But yeah, thanks so much for being involved. And yeah, second, next week, very different topic. Professor Alan Arbogast of the MSU Geography Department is going to be talking about the geography and the evolution of Michigan's coastal sand dunes. So please join us. Something for everyone.
Alan is wonderful. Thank you so very much for having me. I truly appreciate this opportunity. It's, thank you. It's been wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nwando. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Right.